Hello and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Podcast. I'm Andrew Campbell.
And I'm Sarah Sash in beautiful, dry British Columbia. Thanks for joining us.
Well, and we're in beautiful, very wet Ontario. It's always one of those things where it would be really nice if I could share weather with you, Sarah. We always seem, whenever you're wet, I'm dry. Whenever it's wet here, you're dry. We cannot seem to get this to share.
No. But we're not a weather podcast. We're a farming podcast. So back on the farm, I would say the things that are happening right now is the kids have left.
Isn't it? Like, it's one of those things that when school starts, it's such I almost feel bad. It feels so nice because not that I don't love having the kids. I mean, I know it's the same situation with you. Like summer's fun. It's a busy time around the farm. It's great to have them involved and helping and doing all that kind of stuff. But my goodness, is routine ever lovely too. And it's nice that we can kind of get back into routine and they're at school.
We love it when they're home and we love it when they go. So
that is exactly what it is. But when we do talk about kind of the excitement of a new school year and the renewal there, we've actually got some major renewal at the Dairy Farmers of Canada because, Pierre was president of DFC for the last number of years. A new president has been elected into the role, David Wiens. He is by no means a stranger to dairy farmers across Canada, but in July, he was elected president. And as well, Sarah, congratulations to you. You've also been elected to the DFC board. Are you excited? Are you nervous? Where are you?
Super excited. I finally have a great place to use my governance skills. Not that I haven't before, but I'm really looking forward to this opportunity. I never really thought I would make it to the national board, but really grateful and really I feel prepared. And 4 other new members joining alongside me. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I think what's exciting for this episode is we're fortunate to have David Wiens as our guest. We'll get his take on what's happening in the dairy industry and find out about his vision for the future, both for all of us within the industry, but obviously for DFC too. So thanks for choosing the Canadian Podcast. Our guest for this episode is David Wiens. He was elected chair of Dairy Farmers of Manitoba in 2006, a role he served in until July. He was first elected to the Dairy Farmers of Manitoba in 1995. He's also been a director with the Dairy Farmers of Canada board since 2009. And in 2011, he was elected to the position of vice president. During his time on the board, David has been the chair of the promotion committee and is currently serving as the chair of the Pro-Action Committee and of the Canadian Dairy Research Council. David also chairs the committee that's reviewing and updating the code of practice for the care and handling of dairy cattle. And now he is the top chain of command. Congratulations, David Wiens, on being elected president of the Dairy Farmers of Canada. And welcome to the Canadian Podcast.
Well, thank you.
So I'm really looking forward to digging more into your leadership experience, David, because you've got lots of it. But we always ask people about their farms to start out with. So can you give us the quick rundown of that before we start with the other questions? What does your farm look like?
Sure.
And where do you operate?
Sure, yeah. I farm together with my brother in southeastern Manitoba. So that's about almost an hour's drive south of Winnipeg. And we are a third-generation dairy farm, and we're milking 230 cows in a automated milking system, and so and we do a little bit of cash cropping on the side, but our main focus is, of course, for crops for feeding our cows. So that's kind of where we're at, and we've both always enjoyed doing what we do, and we carry on.
Well, and if I can even step back just a little bit further for you, David, one of the things that your bio says is that you actually have a bachelor's in theology from the Canadian Mennonite University. That's an interesting background for a dairy farmer. Can you kind of go back to those university days
Sure.
and what kind of brought you there and to be a dairy farmer today?
Yeah, well, it has been an interesting journey, and I really and I've always had a lot of interest in theology. So it was for me, it was is kind of a passion that I had, and it's interesting that in talking to other people, understand the world in different ways, or they see the world through different lenses, and that's how we understand things. And for me, it was through theology. So, is it directly related to the things I'm doing? That's a good discussion to have, but certainly it helps me to see the world in the way in which I understand it well. So that's where I it's not a usual thing, but certainly it was always my interest, and I had that opportunity way back then, and I'm glad I took it.
It's crazy how things can be so interconnected when you don't really see it to start with. So,
yeah.
Our first guest at the beginning of the podcast was your predecessor, Pierre Lampron. We're all familiar now with Pierre and his role as president. He did that for 6 years, and he's just left office. I'm just a little bit curious about Pierre's legacy and how you see taking on leadership in a different style. What did he do that really put his brand on DFC, and where do you see taking it as we go forward?
Yeah, I certainly start with saying that Pierre and I worked very well together. We developed a very good relationship. And what I saw when Pierre, I think, was the right person at the right time for leadership at DFC. He is very he's a very good person. He was always good at bringing people together. And at that time, there was a lot of division. At DFC, there was we were dealing with some major issues there, but Pierre did have a way of bringing people together and working through some of these things. And I think out of that, we've developed a stronger DFC than what we've ever had before. So I really see that bringing people together was Pierre's strength.
Now, you mentioned, working so closely together. Obviously, it's one thing for a president, vice president to just kind of do that naturally, but you two really did do that well. Can you talk about maybe a couple of the accomplishments that you're really proud of over the last 6 years that you have worked together?
One of the things I'd like to say is, the way in which we represented DFC. And of course, Pierre, being from Quebec, was able to, very eloquently represent us in the French media, for example. And then I took care of the English media. So the way we tag team there, I was really, really proud of the way that worked out. And of course, when we, as we started to work through some of these things at DFC and working, working with other parts of the Canadian dairy industry, right? I mean, we do have the Canadian Milk Supply Management Committee. We have the P10 pooling committee, and of course, that's where Pierre and I could work together very closely and discuss, what the challenges were, and then try to figure out what the best approach was in terms of moving some of these files forward. So I think that the way in which DFC was restructured at the beginning of Pierre's presidency with DFC 2.0, as we like to call it, there were some very major changes, and especially in terms of the area of marketing. And so that we were able to guide that through the process to where we ended up today. So I think that was really good for the industry. And of course, there continues to be work that needs to be done there. But I really look back on those years and feel some pride as to how we're able to accomplish that through some of the most difficult times. And remember, at the same time, there's other things happening in terms of some of the trade negotiations and some of the challenges that we had from that as well.
So now you've taken the torch from Pierre and you're leading the charge on behalf of all dairy farmers in Canada. I know you have a lot of experience, and we've talked about that. But are you a little bit stressed about the challenges ahead? Basically being the lead advocate for the industry, as well as the chair of the board and all of these things. How are you going to grapple with everything to come?
Well, one of the things that I see is that I'm not doing this solo. I have a team around me. I have a really good team at DFC, but also we have a new board coming up. Not everybody is new on the board, but I think we have a very good mix of people with experience and people that are new to the board that bring their experiences from the provinces, which is really important. So I can approach this with some confidence because of the people that I'm surrounded by here at DFC. Whether it's board and staff as well. So that's because I always look at it as it is a team. The strength is in the team, not in the individual. So that's the way I want to approach this as we move forward and address some of the challenges that we now face.
Now, when you do talk about, new faces on the board, Sarah being one of those, there's obviously, you taking the helm, new board members, there's an opportunity here, I think, for some renewal. And if I remember back, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember back to July at the annual meeting in Winnipeg, after you were elected, the word you used was crossroads, for the industry. Where is that crossroads now? And where do you see taking, DFC and the industry along as you do take charge?
One of the things that is really important to me is relationships, and that relationships is within the organization, within DFC, within the board, but it also goes to the broader industry. So, like I said earlier, there's the Canadian Milk Supply Management Committee, there's the Canadian Dairy Commission, there's a P10, chairs group, and so I think it's really important to bring them more together, more collaboration, rather than working in silos. And I think we've come a long ways, but I think there continues to be more work to do. So what I would like to do is help move all of this more together so that and whenever we're operating in silos, then of course it can be disjointed at times because somebody is especially when we start to work through some of the same issues. And so what I see is, the crossroads are, with the challenges that we face, and I know, Sarah, you talked about, the challenges and how, is it daunting? And yes, it is. But at the same time, when we have, and it's not only the trade negotiations or the trade agreements that can be a challenge, but it's also the world in which we live, right? Like we've spent so much time now on things like sustainability and the importance to be, to have, to continue to be strong into the future, to provide the next generation with an opportunity, the kind of opportunities that we had. There are things that need to be addressed. And to me, what I see as part of the crossroad is that DFC is integral to the overall dairy industry in Canada. And I can think of so many ways in which DFC has been instrumental in making things possible for all of us farmers right across the country that we couldn't possibly have if we had just been, a province on our own or even a region on our own. We need the national voice. And so whether we address the trade challenges, but it's also, what are consumers wanting today? To be able to represent ourselves as reflecting the values that our consumers have of the Canadian dairy products that they consume. And so we have to be able to speak to that. And what better? And I know that we can do a lot of work within the provinces, and that is important, I will say, because local is very important. But there's also that the overall picture, the kind of the national approach, because ultimately our future also depends on let's say our federal government and some of the how they approach a lot of the work they're doing, but also in terms of just being able to get the support from the federal government where we need it most. So those are. And without these things, we begin to deteriorate if we're not all together on this. So that crossroads to me is really important, and that is to elevate, the importance of DFC, and maybe just also create better understanding of what DFC does for all of us and how it impacts each one of us on the farms wherever we may be in the country.
I think all of those things are so important, and especially right now, like you say. Andrew mentioned that your acceptance speech at the AGM was really inspiring. Like, for those of us that were there and able to see that, or even logged in online, it felt like something new, and we felt inspired by that. So I'm curious if you could narrow it down into what sums it up. Like, what was the key message you wanted to convey to producers?
And one of the things that I talked about there was about, again, about relationship and about building trust. And I think that without those things, you can have the best ideas in the world about, how to get things done, but really it still will come back to relationship. And when you have relationship, you can build trust. And that's when doors begin to open. That's when you can accomplish things where in the past, it would be, people throw up, I don't know if roadblocks, but reluctance or guardedness, right? And so I think it's important to pursue the relationship aspect and to develop that trust. And that means that, that means making yourself vulnerable. But then as an industry, if we have as a principle, I think we have to pursue equity. So when it comes down to things like, when we talk about, various issues and how we're going to resolve these things, it always has to be a win-win. So you can, and we have to insist on it. It's not something that we can say, you don't want to create an atmosphere where I'm going to get you next time. That is so unhealthy. And I think and this is, and I reflect on my past experiences, right? Like, having chaired the province for many years, but also some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. And so when I look at the industry overall and what the potential is, I think that when we can build those stronger relationships between DFC and the provinces and a better understanding, I think there is huge opportunity for us that has been untapped. And that's the direction in which I think there's big wins in this for all of us.
Well, certainly, I would love to hear what some of those big win potentials might be as you do build those relationships. So what I'd like to do maybe is we'll take a quick break and then start talking about some specific issues that I think, certainly, ring as priorities for myself. I know Sarah's got a few too. So if you stick with us, David, what we'll do is we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back with the president of DFC, David Wiens, right after this.
As a chef, I like composting because it gives back to the earth. Hey Aaron, how do dairy farmers help protect the planet?
On my farm, I compost manure. This helps reduce the carbon footprint of milk production. Plus, manure makes for richer soil, which can help grow crops.
So it's like the circle of life.
Yeah, we're working towards a more sustainable future. I'm in. Are you?
I'm in.
That's Dairy Farming Forward. Dairy Farmers of Canada. Net zero by 2050.
And we're back with David Wiens, the new president of the Dairy Farmers of Canada. David, there were changes at DFC this summer, but we also have a political change because, you got to change everything all at once, it would seem. Lawrence MacAulay has been named the federal Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Now, he's obviously no stranger to the industry. He's been in the role before. But can you maybe comment, like he's one you're going to work with and want to work with, in the future. Talk a little bit about what you think of the change and have you had a chance to talk to him yet?
Yes, I did have a chance to talk to him. I talked to the minister last week, actually, just a short virtual meeting. But he is a very folksy kind of person, and he's really, I think he's got a fantastic personality. So I think we hit it off pretty well. Of course, we know each other from the past because, like you said, previously he has been ag minister as well. And so when I, as VP, I had an opportunity to meet with him. So it was kind of like renewing an old friendship, actually, to me. So it was a very good meeting. We just talked about some of the things that some of the things that we face, the challenges that we have today, but also appreciative of some of the things that the government has done for us, in terms of compensation and so on. So yeah, it was a really good opportunity. I said, I said once, it seems like what timing, like DFC elects a new president and the government appoints a new ag minister. I don't know what was about that, but anyway, and it's good. I think I'm looking forward to working with him. And I know when, I've met Minister Bibeau in the past too, and she was also good to work with. And so it's good to have, I think, within cabinet, it's good to have, Lawrence MacAulay back, but it's also good to have that he now also has that advocate within cabinet that understands a lot of these the dairy industry issues, right? So I see that as a real strength. So yeah, no, we had a great meeting, and like he said, he wants to make himself available to us when we need to have various conversations. So I will certainly want to take him up on that.
So what are the key issues on your radar as we move into this new political season? What kind of things are you going to be raising with politicians into the fall and winter?
Well, yeah, and certainly, one of the things that we've talked about was the front of pack labeling issue, and how negatively it would initially have impacted dairy products, and yet with all the good work that DFC has been doing with the government, there's been it's much less impactful now than it was. So that was an important issue. We also want to talk about some of and we have raised the issue of the latest trade agreement in CUSMA. How let's say the limitation on our, or the cap on our exports, which is a very, very negative feature of that trade agreement, which is very, very unusual, I would say, of any trade agreement that there ever was. And so, just bring that to their attention, and when the agreement is reviewed, that's an area that we would really like to have them, kind of challenge and see if we can't make some changes there. And of course, with there's some discussions going on with the UK in terms of that trade agreement, and just some of the animal welfare aspects of it is concerning to us. I mean, as we're in Canada through ProAction, we have a very, very progressive animal care component to our assurance program, and so it's concerning when trade agreements start to dictate in specifically what that might look like. Every countries, like in Canada, we've developed our animal care through ProAction specific to the Canadian environment, and so we don't want to have that compromised by some trade agreement. So anyway, that's something that we've brought to their attention as well. And of course, some of the things we've just completed is some of the discussions on compensation, and of course we've had those announcements. But also, one of the things that we're really looking into now is their that program that they have, that $330 million program for expanding processing, kind of into the research, but also expanding the processing of proteins in Canada to alleviate some of the problems that we have there. Because as you know, with a cap on our exports, it becomes more difficult to work through those issues there. But anyways, those are some of the things that we're going to focus on. And of course, the other thing that we are also, and the government's very much aware of the progress we've made in the dairy industry in terms of our carbon footprint, in terms of sustainability. That is really that's widely recognized, and we need to keep building on that. But at the same time, we're also looking this isn't only us as dairy farmers kind of standing out on our own. Like, let's work together on that, and let's get some support in some of the things that we're doing to make something better for the whole country.
Well, it certainly sounds like you have no shortage of conversation topics when you're talking to politicians, because, but when you do think of all of the things that, we as an industry do need and want to progress, that checks off a lot of boxes. Now, one of the ones you mentioned, trade, that's obviously always a big conversation point for producers. One thing that comes to my mind is the trade panel that just ruled on the TPP, all of the T's and P's with New Zealand specifically. Can you maybe kind of just bring us up to speed on what that ruling looked like and what kind of an impact maybe we can be expecting over the next number of months?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I would say that, just going back to the CUSMA panel, there was a ruling. There was a challenge, and then there was a ruling on the way in which the TRQs were being allocated, right? So they felt that it was too restrictive by having such a large portion of the TRQs go to processors. And so, what I saw, with New Zealand, it was kind of a copycat thing where, the CPTPP has been in effect for a few years, and suddenly it occurs to them that maybe they should challenge us on that very same thing. And there was a number of other things there too. But the point mainly is that in that challenge, there was no win on it for DFC's part, or on dairy farmers' part, simply because they were challenged. Anything that any change in status quo would make it worse for us. Now, yes, it could have been a lot worse, but certainly this is now it's the allocation of TRQs again that's playing into this and making it more available to other players who are not directly involved in the dairy industry. So that does have impact. I would say it's somewhat limited. It's not it's not devastating, but it certainly is not helpful to us.
So you touched a bit on sustainability and the environment, and we know these are huge things for dairy farmers, something that DFC is working on all the time. We've always been aware that these are things that we can do better in, that there's always room for progress, despite the positives that we have. So how could the government help us achieve our emissions reductions targets, for example? What could the government do to assist us in our efforts to make them even better?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we need is support. Like, it's we all face our challenges from day to day, and as obviously in some parts of the country it's been much more difficult with the price of the cost that we incur on the farm, and so. So when is that? And sometimes, to change, best management practices or make investments on the farm that will help reduce the carbon footprint are a cost up front. And it's not always that easy to just take it out of your current operations to make this happen. So again, this is something, as a country, we're all in this together. So I think it is important for the government to have that, different kind of support, but certainly along the ways of funding, whether it's through grants or even loans or whatever, to help us accomplish some of these things, I think would be very helpful. So and also I think it's good to also just have the acknowledgement from our government of the things that we are doing on the farm, that we have accomplished on the farm, and we've heard that. Because we're doing these things, we need to be doing these things because it's the right thing to do. And certainly from that perspective, I think that it's important as we do these things, it reflects the values that those shared values that we have with our consumers, that say, yeah, these things are important and we're making every effort to make those improvements. And hey, when you look at our track record, it is really good. Yeah, we have a longer way to go. And we don't have all the answers today, but we need that kind of support. So it could be direct funding on the farm. It could be support for the research that's being done, which will help inform how we move forward. So those are, I think, are areas in which the government could really help.
I think you're absolutely right about that. As much as we want to do a lot of new and different things, sometimes it is constrained by what we can do in terms of availability of resources on our farm. So this type of partnership could really take things a lot further. So advocacy, we talked about it a bit. DFC ultimately is an advocacy organization. Tell us about the importance of that mandate.
Yeah, it's so important. We all depend on it. Our existence really depends on it, because there's so many voices in Ottawa where there's so many competing interests, and so that advocacy is so important from our perspective, so that when it comes to things like sustainability and what we're doing, it's important that they know about it. When we approach them, and I think one of the things that's really important here too is there's things that we need the government help, in terms of some of the things we talked about, but other things, whether it's in trade or labeling or things along sustainability. But we also, that advocacy is important when we talk to MPs and deputy ministers and so on. The list is long, different committees. We are also providing solutions. It's not just about coming in and making demands, but saying, here, identify a problem, and here's what we could do, and here's how you could help us get this done for us. And so that's where, but yeah, with advocacy, we should never assume that just because government's very much in favor of supply management. And in fact, the reason that there's still support for supply management, and it is not a political thing, it is supported by all the mainline parties, is that there's that ongoing conversation. They hear from us, they know our story, and then they can and to them that they can relate, they can connect with that, and so that comes through having that conversation. So again, it is so important. And again, really, it comes to that relationship, right? Dairy industry is not just some kind of an industry. It is people. It's farm families across the country. And once I think people, everybody can relate to family, and so they know what we are, who we are, and so then they will think. Then it always matters a lot more about whenever they develop policies that have impact on the dairy industry. Because when I think of for an example is that labeling issue. I think in many countries where there's not good advocacy, they forget that there's real people behind the production of the milk that goes into these products. And while it doesn't really matter, we can make whatever policy ruling we want. We don't really care how it impacts. And now they understand that there are people behind. There's people behind this. There's families behind this, and you impact the lives of these people that are working their utmost to provide our markets with the food that is needed.
I love looking at it that way, David, when you do think of, all of the things that a government has to look at and manage and all of that. The question always is, how do we as an industry stand out? And that screams to me as one of those great ways that we can stand out when you talk about, bringing solutions versus just problems, knowing that there's real people and real families all across the country that are impacted, whether it be on sustainability or trade or processing or, the whole host of things. So I guess just to kind of wrap up, here I am, sitting in Ontario, you're in Manitoba, Sarah's in BC, there's thousands of producers all across the country. What do you think the rest of our role is? You don't need to take this on yourself. For me as a producer here in Ontario or another producer in, any other part of the country, what's our role and how can we support you in moving the entire industry forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question, or a good comment, I think, because we can't all do this all ourselves, like through DFC in working with government and with consumers. I think it's so important to have advocacy that comes right down to farmers across the country, because I think the stories that the farmers have make it real for everybody. And when you tell those stories about how the work you do to when you work with your animals, with the environment, with the community, and that comes from you, that gives us such a strong foundation from which to work off of. And so and bring those stories out there. I know that sometimes they get challenged, but we need to be telling that story. And it always matters when we talk to government officials, for example. They're listening to us because they know who's behind us, and so then it matters to them. So I think the more that dairy farmers across the country can tell their story, and when they have concerns about things, I think it's best to come to us directly. This doesn't it's like a family. If you have issues, resolve your issues within the family, and then go out and meet the world together. And that's the way we're gonna that's gonna build a strength for our overall industry.
Well, certainly you leave me with lots of optimism, David, in terms of looking at all of the challenges that we do have, but looking at it from the lens that, these are all challenges that we can overcome when we do work together. So really, Sarah and I do very much appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule as you get kind of warmed up to being president of DFC. So thanks very much for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity.
Well, Sarah, talking to David, it sounds like we've got some very interesting times, some exciting times as he takes over the organization. What do you think?
It really does. He's obviously got the passion. And I think as producers, that's all we could ask for out of a leader, somebody who's really dedicated, somebody who cares about all of us, no matter where we're located in the country. And I think we definitely heard those things from David. So I'm looking forward to working with him.
Yeah, and I think what really rings true to me on a lot of that is when he does talk about the relationship side and, coming with solutions, not just problems, to help set us apart from all the other priorities that need to be focused on. It really gives me hope. It gives me hope that all the challenges that we do see lying ahead, I think they can all be overcome with a strategy like this, don't you?
I think there's a lot of strength in building trust throughout the country and making that work. So I have high hopes that David will be a leader that brings that for us. So that said, that's it for this edition of the Canadian Podcast. This episode wouldn't have been possible without our production team, Bruce Sargent and Kyle Bélanger. And a big thanks to our sponsor, the Dairy Farmers of Canada.
And thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you soon on another episode of the Canadian Podcast.